in the header. And now since I've created a head tag, I want to close it. So to close head, we do /head. And then we want to open up body, close body, and then close the HTML. So there we go, we have our basic HTML page, and we have some basic information in the header that tells us how to load the style page. The style page right now is just going to be in the same directory, and it's going to be named style.css. So for now, we don't even have to specify any kind of path to the style sheet. So now we have a very basic HTML page, and we're just going to create a new file. Style.css. Okay, so now that we have our style.css, let's give the body in HTML some stuff. So basically in HTML, we have to give the page a color. So that's actually a color blue. There's lots of color things on the web. So you can find hexadecimal color because that's what it is. So if I go to Google, I type in web safe colors. So basically, there's a lot of web safe colors out there. So notice how we have the hexadecimal values again, and these are the colors. But there's roughly about 256 colors that we consider safe for the web. And that's because if somebody has a CRT monitor or something, they can only display those 256 colors. I don't really care about it anymore because most people have an LCD monitor and it looks nice. But these are web safe colors, and we can get their hexadecimal values, and there's lots of resources out there. So basically what I'm going to do is copy the body in, and then quickly explain what some of this stuff is. So basically I want Famous Fill to have a font size of 13 pixels all the way through. So it's kind of like your regular Microsoft Word font. I also want it to be forced to Arial because on most systems, if you're going between Linux, Windows, and Mac, fonts don't look the same. Arial is the only font I found that actually looks the same on every system I've been on. So I usually use Arial as a safe font. My background color is going to be the same thing as the main background color. And then border is 0 pixels. Margin is going to be the space on either side. The auto actually tells us center the page. So here's how it goes. It goes north, east, south, and west. So you can just think of that. So 5 pixel padding at the top. Auto means center on the left. 5 pixels from the bottom. Center from the left. Or right, then left. So basically that's all that does. And then I want my page to always have a width of 1001 pixels because that was the size that Photoshop gave me when I looked at it. Moving on, lots of other cool stuff. So I have links here. So link colors basically allow me to specify what color a link is going to be. We have a::link, which is the color that your link is no matter what. Hover means if we put the mouse over it, what color do we want the link to change to? Saying that it's covered. If it's active and visited, well, active usually doesn't work. It's basically when the link wants to be clicked on or something. I know that you should specify it, although I've never seen a real use for it. So I typically just use the same value as a regular link. And then visited means you've clicked on the link at some time in the past. And that's the color you want it to be. So usually by default it's purple if you've been to it in the past, it's blue if it's a regular link or active, and if you're over it, it usually changes to yellow or something, I forget now. But that's how links work, and they're under the A tag for anchor tag. And then you have your header here, which I try to specify everything. I try to make it somewhat readable by a human if they have to look at it and decipher what it's doing. But the header is basically a div that I specify. In HTML, we have a div tag, which is where text and stuff goes. So if you got to place something onto your web page and properly centered or whatever, especially for a picture, use a div tag because then you can make a background image. Notice how I use the background image, header.png, and then back there it becomes the background of the div, and then all we have to do is size the div through a height and a width. So now we can put text onto the page itself inside of that div, and it'll go over the image. So that's basically how we get an image over some sort of element, and now div.header. Now, how does that relate to the header tag? Well, if we view the source for the website, we're going to see a div class here, header. So our header basically has a bunch of stuff in it. So the header, remember, it has a background image. It shows the thing that we had in Photoshop. But how do we get stuff over it? Well, in this case, how do we get links to work on? Well, we use the anchor tag, which makes a link. We give it some sort of a title, and then we give it a link to go to. But since these are images on the header tag, since FamousPhoto.com has images for all the link things, we have to physically tell the computer where the link is. So when we go over the calendar link, it turns into an actual link, but how do we know where the borders are? Well, that's why we have the class C1, C2, and so on. Basically, in CSS, we specify the position inside of the div where we're going to put the link. So this here tells the computer, or the browser, where the link is going to be positioned. And trust me, that's about 10 hours of work to get those 7 links working properly. So moving on, navigation. Well, if you've ever looked at my site, we remember that the Photoshop had a huge header for the navigation bar. And actually, if I look at the navigation itself, you're going to see that the navigation image, or rather control key, you're going to see that there is the real image. So what is this called? This is called a CSS sprite, and whenever we go over an image, we basically flip it to the image that is supposed to go there when we're over there. But how do we do that? Well, that's some CSS magic once again. And basically what we do is we create a list. So an unordered list, that's the UL element, and then inside we do lists. And basically for each one of these lists, we specify through CSS exactly where they show up. And then notice how we have a span class, photos, which gives us the actual link. Once again, when you're using images, Google really hates you if it has to look at the image to figure out what it is. So what we do is, we hide the text, but we put the text in so that Google knows when we go through for search engine optimization, this is the photos link. Although, we don't display it to the user, so it looks pretty for the user, but Google can still figure out that we're going to the photos page. Same for blog and so on. So that's what we basically do, and in the CSS, we do some more specifications of where everything has to go. In CSS, to achieve everything that we do, we have something called float, which basically means CSS likes to line things up from top to bottom. But if we do float, what it does is it brings it up from the row below to the side so that everything kind of just scrunches together and fits into the outer element. To hide the blog text or the photo text, we do display none in CSS. And that makes the span tag not show any of the text that's in it. And then, in order to get the hover working, so that when we go over it, something else is displayed, we just do list at whatever the element is that we're doing the list for, space, whatever the tag is going to be. So if we're going $hover, meaning that we're hovering over the link, we change the background image. And basically, to specify where we're going to take the background image from, we have to specify some pixel values way over here. So, in order to get this to work, probably a solid 15 hours on my website, but it works, it looks nice, and people get paid all the time to make websites look nice, and it involves a lot of this. Then finally, for the footer, nothing special other than on the footer, I have text on both sides of the footer. And how do we achieve that? Well, once again, we use some float magic. So if we look here, all we have to do really is specify a width that's further than what we need on the left side. We make it float so that everything will come over to the left on the same row. And then the other side, we can basically get the float left. We play a bunch of guessing games so that it floats to wherever the width here is so that it looks like it's positioned correctly. And then the text shows up like it should. Other than that, that's basically all I wanted to cover. I quickly want to go back to what a trace route might look like, because I couldn't really do that. So trace route is just trace RT, I believe on Mac. Nope. There it is. And now I know for a fact that my server is in Chicago. So int.madhouse.us is physically in Chicago. And notice how the trace route basically goes from the top there, openport.buffalo.edu, and it tells me every single hop that my data packet took to get to my server in Chicago. So we can usually tell that it went through Buffalo, and then it went to New York City, and then it went to NQT.net, which is a global provider, which is a major network that goes across the ocean. And it probably so it went from New York City to Chicago, to another Chicago site, to SCNet, which is a Chicago provider, which has a server, and then eventually it goes to where the data center is. So traceroute will tell you a lot about how your packet went throughout the internet, and I know for a fact that traceroute AUB will only work on UB Secure. So other than that, are there any questions for me?